You heard right in the introduction. If you have questions or comments, just type them into the chat box. Make sure that everyone can see them, and then I can see what's coming in, and then we can, address things real time. We can make this as informal as we want to. So with all of that context, we've seen, also why innovation is important. If you look at some of the casualties of disruptive innovation, this whole buzzword of disruptive innovation, you look at, how many of you had a Blockbuster card in your wallet 10 years ago? Borders bookstore. About 5 years ago, 10% of all the books in the United States were going through that channel. Today, it's gone. My 16-year-old doesn't even know what Encyclopedia Britannica is. BlackBerry, disrupted by Apple. So you look at the casualties of disruptive innovation and you think, you recognize why it's important. And there's an important lesson to be learned from all of these failure examples. I mean, think about it. Borders, Blockbuster, BlackBerry. You might think you should never start a company with the letter B. That's the joke here. But actually, if you think about what some of the real morals are, think about what those companies have in common. Just ignore disruptive technology, so the technology change happening out there, remain too tied to their old business model, didn't change fast enough, or all of the above. And, I think it's kind of a no-brainer. It's all of the above. You look at what's required today in terms of doing the exact opposite of these things. We have to understand what's happening out there. We can't be too tied to our model, and we have to constantly be changing and adapting and trying things out and learning from failure. So that's the context that we're living in today. Now, it's even more poignant when you look at what's happening kind of in the world of big companies. You look at the S&P 500, and in 1965, the tenure on that list was 33 years, and by 1990, it was 20 years. And the pace of change, meaning the list was basically turning over in that amount of time. New companies coming on. I mean, you look at Google and Facebook; they didn't even exist on that Fortune 500 list 15 years ago. If these trends continue, 50% of the S&P 500 will be replaced by companies that don't even exist today by 2027. And so with that, rapid change, we have to kind of do things differently in our organizations. What's challenging about that is that if you look at even arguably Apple, one of the most innovative companies in the last 10 years, basically Apple's saying, their CEO, there's no formula for innovation. If there was a formula, companies would just buy their ability to innovate. So it's a little bit daunting. You have all these changes and disruptions happening out there, yet you have the most innovative company in the world saying there's no formula for innovation. So how do you do it? What's involved with that? How do you kind of stay relevant and current and adapt? Now, what's interesting is I think we've kind of recognized this. Some recent research by the Conference Board and PwC basically identified innovation as a top 5 business priority across the board. Globally, innovation is a top 5 business priority of all major companies. I think it was like the top 2,000 companies. And then when you say, well, within innovation, what's your priority within the topic of innovation? And culture was the number 1. And I think people have recognized culture, the age-old statement, culture eats strategy for breakfast or lunch or dinner or whatever meal it was. You've got basically culture being either an enabler or a driver of innovation. And so with that context, my latest book basically outlines 20 years of my experience in working across the Fortune 500 and interviewing hundreds of people, looking at basically making the argument competitive advantage today is really temporary. There is no sustainable competitive advantage. Product, services, business models, they come and go. Culture is the only real semi-sustainable competitive advantage. That's the thing that allows you to continually innovate. But the challenge with it, and why I think that Apple quote is so poignant, every organization's culture is unique. What you do to create your culture of innovation should be different from what your competitors are doing and what anyone else is doing, because every culture is unique and every even subcultures exist within organizations. So different departments might need to operate a little bit differently. So that's the challenge and the opportunity. My view is innovation culture is the only semi-sustainable competitive advantage today. And I say semi-sustainable because you even have to continue to cultivate your culture. So the question is, well, how do you do that? Well, I've looked at a number of different kind of levers, I guess you could say, and these would include best practices, they'd include strategies for shaping culture, but specifically shaping innovation culture. And I know this is a little bit of, there's some detail here. You can have the PDF of these slides. It's freely available. You'll get it afterwards. But this is a model that I have in my book. And in my book, I kind of go around the wheel, and I have examples and best practices and illustrations and assessments and tools for each of these areas. What I'm going to do today is zero in on the middle of it, thinking about your specific strategy for innovation, but I'm going to really focus on the metrics and the rewards and recognition piece. So that's really what we're going to focus on today. And as I go through this, I'm going to give you 4 innovation strategies that tie to these things. So the first is be intentional with your innovation intent. Okay, so what does that mean? Basically, I'm going to share with you a few examples that illustrate what does it mean to have a very clear innovation strategy that everyone understands, and then you can measure, and then you can reward it. So here's a quick example. Intuit, they're a financial software company in Silicon Valley. They're probably one of the most innovative big companies in Silicon Valley. And their mission statement actually is their innovation strategy. It's to improve our customers' financial lives so profoundly they can't imagine going back to the old way, which basically means what they're trying to do is they're trying to tie the mission of their company to their innovation strategy. And if you notice, it's all about the customer. So their innovation externally, not about how we can innovate our processes. It's about how do we change our customers' lives for the better. And so everybody knows this, and they give people toolkits, and they help them kind of support that. And I'll show you some examples of what Intuit's doing. But here's a different example. It's outside of the kind of traditional business world. This is public media and television and radio station in San Francisco. They've done some work with their executive team, and KQED. So they're recognized as one of the most innovative public media stations in the country. And what they've done is they've basically said, here's what innovation means to us. So they've defined it. And look at how different this is. It's just doing the right thing and then they list their stakeholders, audience, community, supporters, staff. And they also, what I like about what they've done is they've recognized the very specific operating principles or behaviors they're looking for from people. So they've really articulated, this is what we mean by innovation, and speed or applying technology. What's interesting about them is they actually identified reducing the number of printed pieces of paper as a metric to apply to technology. I'll get into metrics specifically, but they're doing some interesting things recognizing people around these areas. But the point here is that depending on your organization, you might define innovation differently, and that's perfectly fine. At the broadest level, innovation is about creating value through doing new things. But if we keep going, I think it's important to recognize that there are different types of innovation also. And this kind of goes back to if you're, depending on the organization you're in or consulting to or working with, you may or may not come across different definitions of innovation. Now, if you look at the different levels of innovation, we've talked about the big disruptors. That's getting all the buzz today, You've got Kodak being disrupted, or Netflix disrupting Blockbuster. That's the big buzz. Disruptive innovations on, kind of all the rage today. But in any organization, you have to keep the lights on. You have to kind of keep things going. And incremental innovation is really about staying competitive and doing what you do better today. And so if you look at, and then in the middle, you've got what I call evolutionary innovation, which is really kind of the next generation or advancement of what you're doing today, but you need to do that to really remain competitive. And so when you look at these three types of innovation, you could argue it's really a portfolio. Any organization needs to be looking at all three of these. And then how you promote and foster them may need to be different. Because what might support incremental innovation might actually inhibit disruptive innovation. But the other point here is that there's a lot of different types of innovation even within these. So at the bottom, you can see product innovation, service innovation, process innovation, business model innovation. You can have customer experience innovation. I mean, the list can kind of go on. But the point here is that every organization should kind of anchor itself on what does it mean by innovation first and foremost. Then you get into, well, how do we recognize it, reward it, as well as measure it? So if you've got any questions as we go through this, feel free to just enter it into the chat box. I'm happy to kind of take questions as we go. I am now going to kind of dive into some of the more specific areas here that can help us really support and drive the kind of innovation we want based on how we might define it. So in terms of metrics, I know that that's a hot topic these days. How do you measure things? The key strategy here is you got to measure what's meaningful. So it's pretty simple, but you need to figure out, well, what is meaningful, and then you need to measure it. So this gentleman here, anybody, type into the chat box if you know who he is. Anybody know who he is? Let's see how up on your management thought leaders you are. I'll give you a second. All right, it looks like I may have stumped everyone, and make sure you type in everyone, or you have that everyone selected if you're typing something in when it says send to, so that everybody can see it, or at least I can see it. All right, so it looks like I might have, oh, thank you, Brad, you gave it a shot. Edward Deming, and it's not Edward Deming, Brad, but Marilyn Buckner, correct. It's Peter Drucker. You probably got that because your last names kind of sound alike. But you're right. It's Peter Drucker, who basically said what's measured improves. So it's a very simple philosophy or point that, if you put focus on it, people are going to focus on it. And so you get kind of more of what you look at. Now, what's interesting is that there's a big disconnect when it comes to innovation metrics in the world. Innovation is a top 5 business priority, like we had said, yet only 22% of companies have innovation metrics. A lot of companies have metrics, but we're actually specifically talking about innovation metrics. So only 1/5 of the companies have innovation metrics. So the disconnect is, we know it's important. We know it's a critical element of surviving and thriving in the future, but we're not really measuring it in any kind of major systematic way. Well, there are companies who have done some things to measure it. I'm going to share with you some examples and then some things you can actually measure. So Yum Brands, you might know them, Kentucky Fried Chicken, a number of different fast food brands that they have here. They'd actually stopped growing in the United States, and they were looking at opportunities to continue their business growth. And what they decided to do is to create a metric based on focus on international sales. So creating a disproportionate amount of profit from international sales versus domestic sales. So they set that as a metric for the organization. What happened was, and I'm going to tie this to innovation also, so they decided they got into China. And if you go into China with Kentucky Fried Chicken or KFC, it's not you're not actually going to be able to sell into the Chinese market biscuits and gravy and Kentucky Fried Chicken like you might hear. You have to innovate the menu. And so they created a whole street food menu and then really created a whole new approach to their business in China. And their international sales profits went up from 20% to 70% of their overall revenue. And so you can look at, the setting of a single enterprise metric can really drive kind of whole new investment areas and a whole new area of focus. So that's kind of at a big kind of macro level. There's other types of examples and metrics where you've got like Procter & Gamble. And P&G has kind of been a leader out there in what's called open innovation. Open innovation is basically the recognition that innovation and technology development, new product development, there's a big world out there, and with technology allowing us to tap into the world, we can't expect to just do it all ourselves in our own kind of R&D siloed organization. And so what they did is they set a metric that they wanted to create a disproportionate amount of ideas and technology coming from outside of P&G itself. So P&G has an R&D department, but they decided to try to promote external innovation. And so they went from 10% to over 50% today. It was a journey, but what was also interesting is that their R&D costs, so they were investing millions in R&D, their R&D costs went down, I think, by about a third, because they were actually able to source technology outside instead of develop inside. So not only were they more effective and productive creating things like Febreze or that Mr. Tide's Magic Eraser, Tide Pods, they were able to reduce their costs in doing so. But they set that metric of getting ideas from outside. Other kind of fun examples, here's an illustration of a company called Space Saver. Space Saver is a big industrial company in Wisconsin. And I was walking through their warehouse. They make big kind of shelving, gun racks and library shelving, big metal racks that you store stuff in. And you can see at the very top right, they have this little poster there, it's circled in red. That poster is the Field Museum. It's their installation of a big metal rack in the Field Museum, but it's housing dinosaur bones. And so what they're trying to do is kind of bring the customer and the value they're providing to the customer inside, even in their big manufacturing warehouse in the middle of Wisconsin, so that every employee sees the impact that they're having on the contribution they're making in the world. Now, from a metric standpoint, I mean, that's interesting. It's not exactly a metric, but what they've also done, and this is the plant manager at Space Saver, they've created a very simple mechanism. I mean, these are kind of really kind of feet on the ground manufacturing workers, and they've got this gong. So anytime anyone does something to improve their process or do something that's going to help the customer, they bang the gong. And it's amazing that you kind of walk by this gong and you can ask different people, what is this gong? And they say, well, when something good happens, we bang the gong. And so it becomes more of a kind of a symbol for measuring kind of what's valued. And it's very qualitative, but it actually is kind of, it's really contributing to their culture, and they all kind of know what that is and are trying to do things to get the gong banged. So it's very different from P&G and from the other example with Yum Brands, but it's still kind of a way to measure something good happening and try to create kind of behavior around it. So I'm going to leave us with some examples, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how I look at metrics. I look at metrics in two different ways when it comes to innovation. I look at, on the left side, revenue. I look at that as what I call an output metric. That would be something that is the end goal of what we're going to try to achieve from a business standpoint, assuming we're in a for-profit business. And that could be from revenue. You could look at, you know, overall revenue growth. I like the overall share of the profit in an industry. I mean, market share is one thing, but if you look at your profit share, then that kind of tells you that you have a business model that is working. But revenue from new products or services introduced in the past 3 years is kind of a traditional revenue metric. Those output metrics are really important because that's really what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day in terms of cost reduction or revenue generation. But that's not going to necessarily create a culture of innovation from a metric standpoint. And so the leadership, employees, and customers focus, for me, I look at those as what I call input metrics. Input metrics being something that if you focus on it, then it'll help you create the kind of environment that will lead you to get the output metric. And so, whether I was working with one organization, they wanted to train every single employee in the design thinking innovation process. So number of employees trained in the innovation process became a metric. And for them, the goal was 100%. And then they were going to create an onboarding process for new employees. So, these are things that might not be end goals in and of themselves, and you might continue to, once you achieve a metric here, you could potentially move to a different type of input metric based on where you are in your innovation journey. So I look at metrics like in those two ways, and you'll get these slides. So I know there's a lot of words here, but you can really kind of mix and match these based on what's important for your organization. Okay, so I'm continuing to look for any questions. I'm not seeing anything come in, so I'm just going to continue to roll on through the presentation here and hit rewards and recognition. So, metrics, the way I look at that, metrics are, those are kind of more formal kind of ways in which to measure very specific kind of quantifiable outputs. And then the rewards and recognition can be formal, but also informal, and I'll share with you what I mean by that. So this counterintuitive notion of rewards and giving what I call worthless rewards, my view is worthless rewards are the most valuable rewards when you're focused on shifting culture. And what I mean by worthless rewards is that it doesn't necessarily have a financial value to it. So let me share with you what I mean by that. So at Intuit, I mentioned the software company Intuit in Silicon Valley. They've got this thing called the Innovation Wall of Fame. So if you're an innovator, you might get a poster on the Wall of Fame if you've done something to contribute to the company's success. And everyone gets this toolkit, everyone in the whole company, and you have an opportunity to use this toolkit with a three-step process. So that process is deep customer empathy. If you have an idea, you go out and you kind of check in with customers, understand their problems around that issue or kind of what might be going on with them. And it can be an internal customer too. So if you're in the legal department, you can go talk to the business lines of business that you might be serving. And then go broad to go narrow basically means you brainstorm, you prioritize, and maybe you brainstorm again and you keep prioritizing. And then once you have your few good ideas, then you do rapid experiments with customers. So you actually take your idea and you go talk to real live customers. And again, it could be an external customer if you're in sales or marketing or you're trying to create a product, but it can also be an internal customer. And you just test, what do you think of this idea? What would work? What wouldn't work? And why? How could you make it better? And then that continues the cycle of the empathy, ideas, and experiments. And so what you have at Intuit is you have people who make products and they get recognized on this Wall of Fame. And the reward is basically getting a poster, and you're up there for a year in their corporate innovation center. And then the other thing that you get is you get 3 months of time off, because they've done some research and they know that intrapreneurs, these are not entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs are outside the company, individuals who are entrepreneurial. Intrapreneurs are the inside the company. They know that intrapreneurs, the thing that motivates them most is time, more time to do what they want to do creatively. So they give them 3 months of time off, and they can take that either in a big chunk or over 6 months part-time. And you've got people, who not just make products, but this is the recruiting department. So they did something. It's hard to get good technology talent in Silicon Valley. So they went out and they used their design thinking process, the one I showed you a second ago, and they get a room at a college campus and they take college students through it, solving real problems. And these college students can see the cool stuff that Intuit's doing and engage with them in a real process. And it's way, different experience than the, one-on-one informational interviewing. And Intuit can see how creative these students are, and then they offer them internships and jobs. So they got recognized. This is Intuit's IT department. It's called the Techno Bar. They got a poster. because they innovated how you get support. It's like the Apple Genius Bar. You just go up and you get help. And there's no, kind of special support line to call and a queue to go through and all of that. And so they got that poster. But those are not, it's not a financial reward. These are just recognition. But as people experience the value of it, more people want to use that toolkit. Now, here's another example of quote-unquote worthless rewards. This is KQED again, the media, television and radio station. They created the Q Award. So you might remember their definition of innovation. They had 5 principles. So these are the 5 written down here. And what they do is they identify people and teams who have demonstrated any of these 5 in a quarter, and then they give them the trophy. So they're handing out these trophies. It connects to their brand, the Q in their name. And these trophies are sit on people's desks, and it becomes a representation symbol of doing the kind of behavior that they define as innovation. A worthless reward, but very valuable when communicating the kind of values and behavior you're looking for. So I'm going to share with you one other example, and then I'm going to go to a question that came in from Marilyn. The other example is the California State Automobile Association Insurance Group. They're basically the insurance arm of AAA, American Automobile Association. And one of the things that they did, they had this idea generation system. It was a technology platform called Spigot, and they wanted people to submit ideas to it. That means that it's kind of hard to do that sometimes. You have to, get the URL, you have to click a link, you got to log in, you got to submit your idea, and they were kind of getting a slow start. Well, their project manager, who was a woman in California, and not super outgoing, kind of maybe a little more introverted, and she decided that she wanted to give people, recognize people who had submitted an idea online to kind of get more participation. And so she created these, on the left-hand side there, you can see the Innovation Challenge Contributor light bulb. It's just a piece of paper she printed out. But anyone who had contributed an idea online, she'd put this little light bulb on their cube next to their name. Well, people would see it and they say, well, what's that? And it created this little office buzz. And it almost became like you didn't want to be left out by not having a light bulb. And they really got critical mass. And it's kind of hard to see, but there's these light bulbs all over the back office back there behind the close-ups. And what was really interesting about this is that the participation rate, according to the company that had the technology, 40%. If you could get 40% of all employees participating, you really did great. And so they were really shooting for that 40% participation rate. They did this little light bulb thing kind of as as an experiment, I guess you could say. They ended up with 80% participation rate. 80% of the people in that office participated in that tool, and it became kind of a best practice they're using. This is a worthless reward. There's nothing monetary about this, but what it does is it creates a sense of affiliation and community with people who are all trying to contribute and participate in kind of the same meaningful activity. So I think this is a really interesting example. Last thing I'll share, and then I'll get to Marilyn's question. There's other ways in which you can kind of recognize and reward something that's so important in the innovation process, and it's failure. And it's actually, I'm going to read Marilyn's question right now. She asked, how important is having managers and leaders have the competency of learning agility and having an innovative company? So maybe, Marilyn, you can think about what you mean or define learning agility for me if I don't get it right. But basically, the way I would look at learning agility is the ability to kind of understand something, try something out, learn from it, figure out what works, what doesn't, and then keep going and try the next thing out. And it's that iteration. It's that checking, it's understanding your own assumptions. It's working with the team to kind of recognize what's working and what's not, and learning from their, quote unquote, failures. Well, I think it's critical. And a lot of what we're talking about is giving people the psychological safety and the tools to create, have learning agility and the permission to, fail. And so, and I say quote unquote fail, I actually think, the whole notion that we want to reward failure and that, we need a culture of risk-taking. I think as soon as you start to talk about failure and risk-taking, you kind of miss the point of innovation a bit. Innovation should not be, if people feel like they're taking a risk, it means they actually do have something to lose. What you want is a culture where people feel like trying things out is just about learning. And if it doesn't work out, we're going to learn from it, and we're going to acknowledge what worked and what didn't, and we're going to apply it to the next thing we do. So that is really the essence of what you want from innovation culture. Now, some ways that companies do it, because failure is this kind of taboo concept in some cultures. Tata, the big Indian conglomerate, they have an annual Best Failed Idea Award. So they're giving out their innovation awards. They also want to recognize not everything can work. So here's the best failed idea that we tried because we learned something from it. Eli Lilly, pharmaceutical company, they have failure parties. So it's not actually to celebrate failure, but it's to look at what you tried and what didn't work and apply that learning and identify the learning from it. It's kind of like an after-action review. Facebook has posters, done is better than perfect. They're trying to create the notion that perfection will actually never exist. There's always something else you could do, and if you try to go for perfection, you're actually going to be too slow in today's fast-paced environment. So they're trying to promote that. So that's kind of the whole notion of failure. I hope I tied it enough, Marilyn, to your learning agility question. If I didn't, shoot me another question, and I'll try to go deeper on that. Let's see. So actually, there's another question that came in. Cindy, thanks for submitting this. Where in the organization do you see innovation being driven most effectively? At CEO, at board level, or an innovation R&D functional specialty? Okay, so I'm going to answer this in maybe a little bit of a different way. It's sort of all of the above. So let me describe to you what I mean by that. And then I'll get to my bonus strategy number 4, rewrite the unwritten rules, which is on your screen. But in terms of where it's driven, so I think if you're really shooting for an enterprise-wide culture of innovation, then at the CEO level, the executive level, that is just really, it's really critical. Because I don't know how many times I have worked with kind of middle, upper level leaders who know innovation is important, but the executive team is just so focused on short-term results that the innovation is so incremental that they're really not thinking about the future. And that can be a real challenge. So yes, CEO level. The board should be asking the CEO and executive team, what is your innovation portfolio strategy? And it goes back to the different types of innovation, the incremental, the evolutionary, and the disruptive. So at the board level, if you're able to kind of hold the executive team accountable for efforts focused on a portfolio view, it means that you're not just going to get the incremental stuff, but you're going to try to get the disruptive stuff, which means you got to behave a little bit differently around that. So yes, board level also, but I think if you have, you kind of have to have, you can have it at the executive level. If you don't have it at the board level because they're so focused, it can be challenging, but you can still kind of get away with it sometimes if you kind of do your kind of internal investments and kind of skunk works. The innovation R&D functional. I think that historically there's been, R&D has been a driver of product innovation, service innovation. Innovation and R&D, I think, is important for innovation, but probably more on the evolutionary and also the disruptive, especially, and sometimes even separating it out from the company itself and kind of having what's called an ambidextrous model, where you kind of have a skunk works or some kind of new ventures group working to invest in startups and others. At an enterprise, from an enterprise level is important. But I actually kind of go back to, from a functional standpoint, you can build in your definition of innovation for any function, business function. as well. So if you really want a culture of innovation, from a human resources standpoint, you could say, well, what's our HR function innovation strategy? How do we define innovation? Well, maybe it's to, recruit and grow the most innovative people to take our organization into the future. And then you kind of look at, well, what does that mean? So my view is that if you're really trying to create a culture of innovation, every function could have its own definition and kind of approach to how you look at innovation, reward it, and measure it. From a product service business model standpoint, I definitely think that there are models where R&D and innovation can play a strong role. Okay, so hopefully that answered your question, Cindy. If not, go ahead and feel free to type any kind of follow-up there. And then let's see here if there's anything else. Here's one from Leslie. Can you clarify the differences between continuous improvement and incremental innovation? I love this one. I'll just give you a quick story on this one. I was working with they're probably let's see, I guess they're about a $4 billion company, 3,000 employees, and their CEO and executive team said, we're going to create a culture of innovation. That's a 3-year initiative, and we're going to focus on that. And so they created an innovation group that was connected actually to HR. And they said, we're gonna kind of figure out what our innovation strategy is. And they recognized the portfolio view. So they thought incremental innovation, we need everybody innovating. Well, they started to run up against charter issues with the continuous improvement group. Well, that was kind of an organizational structure issue and kind of part of their culture where people kind of needed to kind of quote unquote own different parts of various processes. But what we help them recognize is incremental innovation to them actually is continuous improvement. I view these things as interchangeable. So I think the good news is a lot of organizations that have continuous improvement initiatives, programs that's kind of embedded into your culture, you can actually look at that as incremental innovation because it's just basically making small improvements to things at any time, but giving anyone the ability to do it. And so the good news there is that if you're trying to, a lot of organizations now are kind of on the innovation, bandwagon. The good news is that you can basically look at successes with continuous improvement where you've really kind of made a impact in the organization and just highlight those and basically say, we're actually doing it and here's some great examples of it. And we might have called it continuous improvement, but the world is about innovation these days and this is, we've already been doing it and this is what we, want more of. And we might want more of some of the bigger stuff too. And that's that portfolio view I mentioned. So hopefully I got that one for you, Leslie. If not, feel free to kind of dig a little bit deeper and talk about some of the maybe nuances as you might see it, and then I can respond to that. Okay, so I think I have covered the questions that have been coming in. If you've got any more, feel free. So I just have a few more minutes here in the formal presentation, and then we can continue to even open it up to more discussion. But those are the 3 strategies around your innovation intent, your metrics, and then kind of the worthless rewards, so to speak. Bonus strategy number 4, rewrite the unwritten rules. And what do I mean by that? So rewrite the unwritten rules basically is about culture. And the whole concept of culture, a lot of people, I think, talk about it and maybe don't even have real definitions of it. It's kind of like the word innovation. I actually think culture is pretty simple when you think about, it's the norms and values that guide behavior. That's how I would define it. But I think that in terms of how it gets shaped each and every day, it's actually pretty simple. And so what the model is here is that people have experiences every day in our organizations and life, and those experiences, whatever might be going on out there, like so let's say you're in a meeting and you come up with an idea and you share your idea and one person says, well, we can't do that. We don't have enough data yet. We need more data to be able to do anything. Let's go out and do a big research project and get all the data so we're really clear that this is going to work 100%. Another person might say, well, yeah, but we did that 10 years ago and it didn't work, so let's, forget that. So if you hear those things, those are experiences that people have in everyday life. Well, those experiences shape assumptions. So the assumptions that if I'm in that meeting, I might think, oh, well, data has to be perfect, and I've got to go collect this data, and then the assumption is, well, I've got to go do all this other work, and then it's going to take 4 or 5 months to collect this data, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to use that, and maybe if it's not perfect, we'll have to go get more data. The assumption there is that, it's okay to move slow. It's okay to have kind of perfect information, which actually never exists. Perfect information never exists when it comes to innovation, especially the bigger stuff. And so it shapes assumptions about what is valued and kind of what works in the organization. And then those assumptions shapes behavior. So the behavior then is, well, everybody's going out and collecting more data and arguing about facts and, kind of taking their time and not going out there and just trying stuff out. If you need more data before you can do anything real, then you're hardly going to create a learning culture, and you're hardly going to create that kind of iterative learning and design thinking that's needed for that learning agility. Learning agility, as Marilyn talked about, is trying stuff out. It's kind of getting out there, rolling up your sleeves. And so the way in which you change culture towards innovation, I'm talking innovation culture. I think this applies to culture in general, but from an innovation lens, what I've done in my book, I shared the model. I've created some, a toolkit, basically. This is what I call, it's a little bit of an eye chart, but you'll get the slides. This is what I call the invisible advantage map. And it's similar to some of the other kind of templates and canvases out there, but basically it's a way in which you can work with a team and you can look at the different dimensions of innovation culture. And you can see here that, this is based on the model I shared. We went through metrics and rewards and recognition. There are some definitions here as well as prompt questions. And then on the right-hand side, there's a whole list of various things that you can do in terms of best practices. And actually, metrics is probably the longest list here. So when you think about the levers, the things you can change in the environment that shifts people's experiences, there's things related to any of these 7 areas. The 7th is right in the middle. So you got 6 areas plus the 7th, which is your innovation intent. So I look at this as kind of a menu of things that you can use to change people's experiences in the organization so that they recognize and see that innovation is valued, that kind of learning agility is valued, and that kind of continuous improvement and incremental innovation, as well as the bigger stuff, is something that everyone is expected to do and encouraged to do. And so with that, there's like I mentioned, a toolkit. That is a big poster. What I just shared with you is like a big 4-foot by 3-foot poster that's a PDF. You can print it out. There's a diagnostic that goes through those different dimensions. There's various things I've just made freely available related to my book. My book is, it's only 120 pages. It's a small little tiny square book, but it's got connected to it a whole toolkit. And so for those of you interested in the book, you can, kind of type this link in here and kind of learn more about it. And then there's also, what I should mention is, as part of the work with the CEO that I do, we have various workshops that go into the different dimensions and kind of help people understand how to create a whole culture of innovation. So I'm going to just leave it at that and see if there's any final questions or comments or other examples anyone wants to share. I'm looking at my chat box here. And if there's not, because I was kind of addressing things as we were going, that is just fine. But I want to just kind of, we left a few minutes here at the end to see if there was anything else that people wanted to talk about. Just kind of an open forum here. Yeah, so here's another one. Leslie, thanks. Could you share an example of a company that has effectively balanced prioritizing innovation in a financially constrained environment? Yeah, that's a funny question to me, because I can't imagine a company operating, other than maybe Google and Facebook, in a non-financially constrained environment. I think if I were to ask people, oh, do you have, how many of you have unlimited, unconstrained resources for innovation? I mean, most of the organizations I work with are always feeling financially constrained. My guess would be different organizations truly are, have different levels of constraint. I actually think financial constraints produces creativity, and kind of necessity is the mother of invention, they say. I actually have seen that and do believe it. So an example, the insurance company that I mentioned, AAA Insurance, they, it's not like they have a lot of money. They're pretty, they're not a publicly traded company, so they don't have those pressures, but they're pretty cost conscious. And so, they, as an insurance company, they were really working to try to figure out, well, how do they promote innovation? And what basically they did is they decided to give everybody a toolkit, kind of like that Intuit one, and then just do training, have people trained in that toolkit. And well, I helped them actually create the toolkit and design the training, but they actually had 15 facilitators, and those facilitators just got trained in the design thinking process tied to their specific challenges. And what they did is they actually gave every team that went through it was a half-day session. They actually were working on real business problems that their team had. So it was very applied. And so they actually came up with a whole bunch of great ideas through using internal facilitators, and just, kind of pulled people out for a 3-hour meeting, and had, a lot of great success with that. So, that would be an example of really innovation, doing innovation cheaply. The KQED, the public media station, they don't have a lot of money. If anything, it's kind of even dwindling now with some of the shifts kind of politically, and so they had to be really lean, and they doing most of it internally. Yeah, they have some, they created some of those trophies and that kind of thing. But a lot of the things I just shared with you, you can create metrics. That doesn't cost a lot of money. You can create little recognition and awards that doesn't cost a lot of money. A lot of it's just about, kind of figuring out what do you want to achieve, and how do you, test, try things out as cheaply as possible, and getting people tools to do so. The flip side of that is, people do need some time. You need to be able to give people time to innovate. So you've got Intuit gives people about, I think it's 15% time. 3M, I did a session there with the CEO on innovation culture. They give people 15% of their time to just come up with ideas. So is that a cost? It's sort of a indirect cost, but time is important for innovation. Time and tools, I think, are important. The tools don't have to be expensive. There's a lot of open source tools out there now. Okay, so let's see if there's anything else. Thank you, Stacy. I love short books too. I barely read anymore. There's just so much out there. So I like to read short things. So thanks for that comment. I think I've got them all. No more questions coming in. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to turn it back over to my friends at the CEO and kind of let you guys wrap it up.
All right, thank you so much, Soren, and thank you everybody for joining us. One more thing I wanted to point out is our upcoming program with Soren. So Demystifying Innovation, that will be happening in February. So go ahead and look out for that if you're interested. And if there are no other questions, then we can go ahead and wrap it up. All right, looks like no more questions. Thank you everyone for joining us. Have an excellent day.
Thanks everybody.